Cold.
What are we talking about again? Sandwiches? Hey, everybody. Welcome. Thanks for joining us with our crazy new backdrop. Holy shit. Talk about putting some money into the production. Yeah. Hey,
Or
everybody.
knowing artists.
Or knowing awesome artists. That is true. Thanks for being here. I'm joined by Eleanor Goldfield, per usual, for Saturdays.
Which hasn't happened in a few
We
Saturdays.
did miss at least one or two.
Per
or something.
usual, except for recently.
Per usual, except when not usual. We got a lot of stories for you. We're going to dig into the truth about the protests in Iran. And no, I'm not going to say what you think I'm going to say. Well, maybe some of what you think I'm going to say, but I'm not going to say all of what you think I'm going to say. Okay, there's going to be other things that you think I'm going to say.
So stay tuned.
Stay tuned. We're going to get into who the CIA is honoring now, which is amazing. And we're going to get into a bunch of things. Protests, yeah. All kinds of good stuff going on. We might actually have a disagreement here on the podcast. We'll see. We'll see where that story goes. I'm going to keep that one a secret. Anyway, thanks for joining us. And let's dig in. Oh, and by the way, this will be probably be our normal time. Probably, as usual, our normal time going forward.
Didn't you and Graham have a bit about this too? Like,
do not interrupt when I'm giving scheduled tips. 2 p.m. Eastern. It will probably be our new regular time for Saturdays. What was that?
Didn't you and Graham have an ongoing tiff about this? Like, no, it's Fridays. No, it's Thursdays. Now it's Tuesdays.
Yes, it continues. We don't actually know what day we tape. Sometimes he tapes on different days than I tape, and then we just mesh them together, pretend we were there. All right, so Iran, as many of you know, there are protests going on in Iran. The U.S. and Western media are very excited about this. They've got on their little support Iranian women T-shirts, and they're all of a sudden these people, this mainstream media, our government care a lot about Iranian women. As of last week or 2 weeks ago, they didn't, but now they do. Now they're fucking upset, and they want to care for Iranian women. And they're not going to change the sanctions that kill Iranian women. But otherwise, they are fucking there for Iranian women. So we wanted to get into some of the details, and we're going to give a nuanced view. God forbid, I know on the online chats, you are not allowed to have a nuanced view. So we're going to give a nuanced view on this. And let me just give...
Maybe that should just be what our...
Nuanced view?
What we're called. Not the view, the nuanced view.
The nuanced view. As opposed to the fucking idiot liberal nonsense view that's the
Is it even liberal? I just thought it was... I don't know. Carry on.
Right, so there's a great article by Elizabeth Segrin, who you should definitely check her work out, but check out. This is in Covert Action Magazine, and you should check out what they say. I'm just going to go through a few points of it. We don't have time to go through every bit of it. But so obviously this is about the sudden death of a Kurdish Iranian woman named Mahsa Amini.
Also known as Gina.
Also known as Gina.
That was her given name in Kurdistan. Carry on. Sorry.
No, it's fine. Amini's death is being exploited by Western-backed forces to hasten a color revolution and create the conditions for a greater destabilization and regime change in the region. And the author goes on to explain why she has that view of it. She doesn't just say it with certainty and not give anything behind it. For one thing, just for those of you who haven't even heard of this story, if you haven't, she was stopped by what are called the morality police in Iran for not wearing a hijab correctly and likely attacked. At least that is the ongoing narrative. And there is some debate as to whether they, beat her and attacked her more extensively or more horribly because she was Kurdish. But either way, she's then brought into the police station, and where things get tricky is some say that there's video of her standing in the police station and then she collapses. Some say, and she ultimately dies. Some say she collapsed because of the attack. Some say she just happened to collapse and Western media is using this to say that she was killed by the morality police. In my view, it for her, yes, for her family and stuff, it very much matters. But in terms of my take on these protests and things, it doesn't much matter, whether the police say one thing and I want to say, in the nuanced view I want to give, and we'll have more details in a second, but is that the idea of being opposed to these morality police and standing up against authoritarian bullshit like this, I support that. I also support pretty much almost every single protest against police. Doesn't really matter the country. In general, I am for protests against police. So you'd be hard pressed to come up with a protest against police where I'm like, they really need to stop doing that. The police are just doing their best. So especially with something like quote unquote morality police. But the other side of this nuanced view is that the US and Western outlets, etc., are expanding this, trying to build it into a regime change issue, trying to bring down Iran and create a failed state and just horror. They would love for it to be the next Libya, our US government would. And that's the nuanced view. And I'll get into some more details, but I wanted to let you give your take.
Well, so I think, and actually, I'm going to have an Iranian American peace activist on the Project Censored show in a few days, or the interview's already happened. It's going to air in a few days. To important context, not just about the history of hijab in Iran, but also how this is being covered and the importance of understanding what's going on in Iran as Americans. And I think it's really important to recognize that more than one thing can be true at once, that those of us who believe in basic human rights can look at the Iranian government and say that it is oppressive and it is unjust. And at the same time, we can say that is not our fucking lane as Americans or anybody who's not Iranian. It is not our fucking lane, and it is not our right to dictate in any way, either passively or actively, as is the case in U.S. intervention history, to actively or passively push for a change in that government. And so both of those things can be true. And so I think it's very important to highlight the bullshittery of these liberal protests that are saying that, kind of like with the Ukraine thing. And I think that Elizabeth points this out in the article as well, if I'm not much mistaken, but that this is something that has happened with Ukraine as well. It's like, oh, stand with Ukraine, and oh, we care about these people. And it's like, but if you did, then you wouldn't be out with just like a Ukrainian flag. You'd be looking at the context of the situation. You'd be understanding.
You would want peace.
Well,
you
right,
would want peace. Like,
but I mean, I think they do want peace, but they don't understand the context of what they're pushing for by waving that stupid fucking Ukrainian flag. And so I think it's a similar
call for peace. They're not calling for peace talks.
So I think that that's an important thing to highlight, is that we should definitely be pointing out that these protests that stand in support of Iranian women are at the best, in the best case, it's people who mean well but are just falling into the trap of U.S. imperialism. And at the same time, it is important to engage in actual solidarity. So how could we actually be in solidarity with the people of Iran? How can we actually be in solidarity with people that are dealing with oppressive governments, oppressive police, and things like that, which includes the US, by the way. But how can we be in actual solidarity? Not this flimsy liberal bullshit solidarity, which isn't solidarity, but how can we actually be in solidarity? And there's several ways to go about that. But I think that it's important to accept that both of those things are true at the same time. So I feel like a lot of the more leftist and US critical articles that I'm seeing are making brilliant points about US interventionism, US imperialism, and things like that, but aren't making the point as well about the fact that Iran does in fact have oppressive policies, that
Right,
the
so
people
you're
of Iran, not us, have every right to be in the streets protesting, that they have every right to call for systemic change, just like we do.
so you're saying there, yeah, you're saying there are flaws on both sides, and both sides is not Republican and Democrat. Both sides is mainstream media and this very tiny independent leftist world online that, even though you and I read a lot of, and you can get them all at radindymedia.com, even though that it may be a prevalent force in our life, it is a tiny minuscule amount of the actual views that Americans actually what they watch and view. So you have the mainstream media doing this horrific, like, oh, we're going to support women in Iran by just demanding regime change and like some sort of failed state. We're going to collapse. Let me just finish with one thing. We're going to collapse this system to help women in Iran, and yet there's little to no mention by mainstream media of, oh, here's one way to help women and children and also men in Iran would be to end our economic war on them that kills and harms people the most, who are ill, infirmed, old, babies, those who are struggling. And so it's like, if you actually gave a flying fuck about human rights or the life of these people, that would be step one.
And I think what I was thinking of was this echoes very it's very reminiscent of what we saw. I don't fucking know. It's just been like one long year since like 2019, so I don't even know when this happened. But when the U.S. was pulling troops out of Afghanistan, all of a sudden everybody's like, "Well, think of the women of Afghanistan. Think
Right.
of the women. Think of the women." And
Right.
it's like, motherfuckers, you've been in there for fucking 20 years. You don't think any women have had their lives destroyed because of U.S. imperialism? You fucking
and more women and children have died with our sanctions this year.
I was just gonna say that.
Sorry.
So more, yeah. Well, you just fucking said it. So
sorry.
I can't interrupt you, but you can interrupt me. What the fuck? Speaking of women's rights. So
hashtag down with Lee Camp.
So basically this is so repetitive, right? Because all of a sudden we care about the women of Iran, just like all of a sudden we cared about the women of Afghanistan. And it's like, dude, this is so tired. And of course, you mentioned like sanctions. The sanctions against Iran have killed thousands. They have, and the woman that I'm speaking to that's going to be on the Project Censored radio show will be talking about this as well.
Also a podcast, Project Censored.
Yes. These sanctions have killed so many people, and that it's so important to highlight that this is part of a context that has to be brought up. And I think some people have said to me, well, Eleanor, that's not really the point here. The point here is that, these protests are happening because of the violence against women. And I'm like, okay, let's just hypothetically say that there's no ulterior motive for these protests. They're all really they're just Iranians, and they're only Iranians that don't have any like backing from the US or anything like that. And they're really just out there the way that we were out there against police brutality after George Floyd or something like that,
I also protested the latest Thor movie. Not a fan.
Well, I probably wouldn't be either, but so I think that let's just say that that's the case. You still need this context, because it would be like if we're talking about, there's civil unrest in Cuba. Let's say that there were. Okay, well, let's look at the situation in Cuba. People are in dire straits because of the embargo that's been there for more than half of a century against Cuba by the United States. You cannot talk about people's lived experiences unless you talk about an oppressive economic warfare that makes their lived experiences fucking oppressive.
Right.
And so let's just, even if that were the case, that these protests are all about hijab and all about women's rights, yes, but women's rights go beyond what's just on their fucking head and go to our entire body and our ability to live, in not just survive, but to thrive. And you can't fucking do that if you are living in a state of economic warfare. And so this context is super important. And also, you know, what the article points out, and yeah, and I think that there are, I should find it, but there are legit protests happening in Iran, and there are legit protesters, and we should stand in solidarity with these people and do that without pushing for regime change, or without towing the line of the US
Right.
policy.
And you'll notice how quickly, when the U.S. is trying to harm an enemy, what they, meaning our ruling class, view as an enemy, they quickly take a protest that could be a legitimate protest against, let's say, the police in Iran or the police in some other country, and they turn it into, well, we need regime change. It has to be about regime change, and they try and push it to that almost immediately. And so I want to get to some of this article. We can still get back to that in a minute. But what Elizabeth Segrin in this article goes through is U.S. examples of U.S. Ongoing lies to try and create regime change or justification for regime change against other countries. So like in the first Gulf War, there was the false testimony of quote unquote Nurse Nayira in front of Congress, in which she said Iraqi troops invading Kuwait City were in a hospital removing 312 babies from incubators and leaving them to die on the floor. That turned out to be all false. She gets into the Syrian chemical weapons attack that have turned out to be all false. The OPCW had 4 whistleblowers come forward, not just 1, but 4 at the most official chemical weapons investigation organization that exists on the planet. 4 whistleblowers came forward and said that their reports were changed or doctored to try and justify an attack on Syria. So she goes through some of those examples. And then she says, of course, the death of this young woman is meaning in Iran, is undeniably upsetting. And if evidence comes forward suggesting the morality police are indeed to blame, then the reasonable demand is to put those officers on trial for police brutality and demand accountability of the country's state officials, which is similar in the U.S., where our police kill a crazy number of human beings a year. It's usually over 1,000. However, I will be covering on the next Most Censored News about how studies now show it's double that, meaning it's every year about half of all deaths by U.S. police are not actually reported correctly. So in fact, our police are killing like 2,000 people a year. And when protests erupt against those kind of things, do we generally call for like regime change? I mean, not that I necessarily be opposed to it all the time, but no, normally those protests say things like defund the police or put those police officers on trial or get rid of harsh tactics. Like those are often the protest demands. Whereas when it's in another country that the U.S. is opposed to, we try and immediately make it about regime change because that's our real goal. Our real goal is not like the U.S. wouldn't give a shit if the morality police were banned in Iran. That doesn't matter to them. What our ruling class wants is for Iran to collapse, like to end Iran. And so I think that's another great point. And then just one more quick thing. Elizabeth Segrin goes on to talk about the sea of human rights catastrophes that are going on around our world that the U.S. and not U.S. people, U.S. media, U.S. ruling class seem to not care at all about. Seem to not give a flying fuck about. The women in Saudi Arabia, who many say are far more oppressed than Iran. The women in Yemen that Saudi Arabia, our ally, is destroying, killing, causing the most humanitarian catastrophe around the globe. Women in Afghanistan that you brought up. These are all going on. Palestinian women that we are endorsing the exploitation and killing of. These are all going on simultaneously. And when was the last time you saw CNN coverage about how Palestinian women are exploited or harmed?
I know. Well, and lest we forget,
I like the word less, so I'm already on board.
Lest we forget. It does sound a little bit like
Sophisticated. Right.
It sounds sophisticated. What was that? That British. Oh God damn it! Where
Bertrand Russell.
Masterpiece Theater. Masterpiece Theater. Good evening.
It does sound like Masterpiece
Lest
Theater.
we forget that in the year of our Lord. Okay, so I was just looking at the.
I believe it's murder. They say murder.
You
a
really
lot.
like saying.
I like murder because it has 0 R's. That's what I like about it.
Well, it sounds nicer than murder. Murder sounds it sounds so like
Ouch.
rodent-esque. Murder.
How about murder? It's not rodent.
No, it's still up your nose.
Okay, whatever you just said is anti-Semitic.
I didn't say up your big nose, okay? Just said up your nose. Anyway, moving on. So I was just looking at the year. It was 1953 that the CIA, and by the way, the CIA publicly admitted this, that it was involved in the coup against Iran's Prime Minister Mossadegh in 1953.
Mossadegh.
Sorry. And that, so, I mean, what we're talking about in Iran is obviously, yes, in the here and now. But again, we have to understand the history if we're going to understand the present. And the fucking US has been fucking with Iran for years, like for decades. So again, like this
why stop now? It's all gone so well.
Of course. And so again, like it's the same thing with Ukraine. I know I keep bringing that up, but it's, you know, it's current events. It's something that we've been fucking with Ukraine and pushing NATO further towards Russia for decades. I mean, since NATO was created. So if you don't get the context of these situations, then you can't understand what's going on in these places right now. And again, final point, because I feel like it's not said enough on left outlets. This does not mean that all of these protests are illegitimate. It does not mean that the demands of the people who are in the streets and are legitimately the people of Iran are illegitimate. It does not mean that these protests are all orchestrated by the US. There is legitimate, I keep saying legitimate, but it's a good word. There is legitimate distrust.
I think you're legitimately using it correctly. So there's that.
Am I literally using it correctly? There is absolute anger towards the current government of Iran, and that should not be glossed over just because we want to highlight the fact that the US is a giant terrorist organization. Again, we should really be able to
says so on the welcome mat.
We should really be able to hold two fucking thoughts in our head at the same time.
Yeah, I know. Like, if there was a theme to my like live streams and everything, other than burn it all down, it would be like I'm gonna give a nuanced view and everyone's gonna hate it. Like I always find myself in the position of being like, both these things are true. Like, I can be opposed to the Russian invasion and opposed to the proxy war and opposed to US and NATO, pushing onto Russia and opposed to the US backed Maidan coup and opposed to funding and arming Nazis. I can be opposed to all those things at once. And people are like, no, you can't. It's a lot of that.
Well, I'm here for you.
Thank you. You get it. She gets it. All right. So there's so much more in this article I want to go through, but I'm not going to because otherwise we spend the whole hour on it. So I'm going to post it in the. What was that about?
It's the elbow.
I warned you that I don't like this elbow setup because I'm not left-handed. Okay. You just dance behind me like this is some sort of a go-go.
A go-go?
Something a go-go, you know?
It's just go-go. They're go-go dancers. They're not a go-go dancers. They
So
were go-go dancers.
The go-go dancers?
Yeah. It was whiskey a go-go, but they were go-go dancers, not a go-go.
Okay. Yeah, but I meant something a go-go, like whiskey a go-go.
I don't think you can do...
Can we say go anymore?
What?
It's a lot of go.
Is it legitimate? Is it legitimate?
We're using it legitimately. This is common censor to go-go. So
Wait, does that mean that you're going to be wearing a cute dress and standing in a cage dancing?
I know they can't see it, but why'd you have to mention my cute dress?
Because I think you should share it with the world, Lee.
So I just put the link to the article in the comment thread. You're welcome to go read the full article about what's going on in Iran right now. And so we're getting on to other stories. We'll do one or two more stories, and then the rest of the live stream will be at rumble.com/Lee Camp. That's rumble.com/Lee Camp, and it is free to go there. There is no charge. So please, if you're enjoying this and you want to keep seeing it and you want to hear about the other stories we're about to cover, then go to rumble.com/Lee Camp. All right. That being said, if you want to lead us through this story, I will say take it away.
So before we started, Lee comes up to me. He's like, so do you have any like good news stories? I'm like, what the fuck am I? I never have any good news.
And by the way,
stories for you.
my bar for good news stories, you actually do have a lot. My bar for good news stories is very low. It means like a group of people are about to try and strike. Like it's just,
I mean,
there are low level good news stories.
I do have a good news story but I can't really go into it because it's going to be on Project Censored.
Found a peanut under the couch.
Ew.
And it was delicious.
Ew.
So that's my good news story.
Gross. Okay, so this story is via Truth Out. I almost said Truth Dig.
Truth Dig. Many of you know that I've been banned and censored from RT America because it was shut down. My show was shut down. My YouTube channel was shut down. All of it was shut down. Many of you do not know or may not remember that the same thing, it's a very similar thing happened to me at Truth Dig, where Chris Hedges also. So me and Chris Hedges were both there, and we were all shut down. Like Truth Dig was basically shut down, and largely because of me and Chris Hedges. The publisher didn't specifically wanted to get rid of me and Chris Hedges, and Robert Scheer said, no, that's not happening. And so she blew it all up. But anyway, go ahead. It's interesting that it's happened more than once.
So this story comes from a report that 1 in 4, from the SE Justice Group, a California-based nonprofit that advocates for women with incarcerated loved ones. An estimated 1 in 4 women in the United States have a family member in prison. 1 in 4. Holy shit.
That's crazy.
To give you an example of these numbers, so it's estimated that by the time a woman hits menopause, 1 in 4 women will have an abortion. And I'm sure most people listening to this know someone who's had an abortion or know a friend of a friend of a friend or something like that. So it's an equal percentage of women in the US who will have had an abortion who have a fucking loved one in prison, which says many things, and I want to get into some of those. But
this was not the good news story.
No,
okay.
No, there's really no silver lining to this at all. I'm sorry.
Okay, got it.
So 93% of incarcerated people are men. About half of them are fathers.
Wow, 93%.
Yeah.
Maybe women should rule the world. It sounds like we're doing all the dark shit.
Well, assuming that everybody in prison has done dark shit, which is of course not true.
I know.
About half of those men in prison are fathers. And so this means that this is an aspect that has led to, communities really falling apart because women are left to manage families and like entire communities on their own. As one person says, a sociology professor at UC Irvine said, I think what is a bit less obvious to people is all the costs that are associated with incarceration and how women disproportionately share the burden of those costs. And these are not just monetary. These are, of course, in terms of mental, emotional, physical. And this, of course, spans lifetimes. They spoke to one woman who is 32 now, and her father is in prison and has been since she was a kid. And they asked her, what do you remember about your father? And she said, I just remember that we would drive 2 hours to go see him. and that's it. And so these are these stats, which, sometimes we can get lost in stats, and sometimes we feel like stats are flat. But it's important to recognize that the people behind these, and that the US is one of the largest, not sorry, the largest prison population in the entire world. We can sometimes just think about like the people in jail, which is of course important to do, to focus on incarcerated folks, but we forget the ripple effects, right? The fact that these people have never existed in a vacuum, right? They have families, they have loved ones, they have community members that they are no longer able to be with, and that are now feeling the burden, like I said, mentally, physically, emotionally, and economically, because these people have been ripped out of those communities.
And that's why it's always fucking horrific when, like the thing that Kamala Harris was pushing when she was the lead lawyer in California, she was pushing putting women mothers in prison when their kids are truant, meaning not showing up to school. And that's just one example, but there are other forms of arrest for, not taking care of your kid appropriately, where it's people just trying to get by, fucking incredibly tough lives, and they're trying to get by, and they end up going to prison. And it's like, well, what destroys children and families more than sending the person to prison? It's like that. Then there's just a spiral of destruction in the community, and many of these prisoners, many of them are connected to drug charges, which the drug war was actually created partially to destroy communities. So it's having the effect that it was intended to have. Many people think, oh, it's just a side effect. They didn't mean to do. No, it was intended to destroy communities. I've covered this story before. One of the top Nixon aides, Ehrlichman, said in the 90s, he admitted, many years after the fact, that the drug war, which was heavily ramped up, basically created by Nixon, was done to destroy activist communities and Black communities, two of Nixon's enemies. And it's succeeding. It's destroying all those communities.
Yeah. And so again, like this, and I wanted to share this because we think about and we talk about the prison populations a lot and how horrific US prisons are. And yet we kind of miss looking at the larger picture. And so I wanted to make sure, I guess maybe that's the theme for this. Let's look at the larger picture with Iran and with the largest fucking prison population in the world. Like, this has context and has effects that move beyond just that single.
It's not just
person.
It's not just the person in prison. It's a great point. And the reason the U.S. a large part of the reason the U.S. has the largest prison population in the world. And by the way, we have Joe Biden also to thank, not just Nixon, but Joe Biden's 94 crime bill that doubled, tripled the prison population, because things like 3 strikes and you're out. Now, there's a lot of people out there, usually liberals, who and liberals and I guess middle class Republicans as well, who think like, well, 3 strikes, man. Sorry, that's fucking on you. 3 strikes. And it's like, some of those so-called strikes are like tiny nothing drug charges, or talking back to a cop, and then the cop gets, fucking tackles you and says resisting arrest. Like, it could be completely garbage charges and you're in prison for life. Like, it's fucking insanity. Other countries don't have anything near this because it's a crime against fucking humanity, and we act like it's normal. It's usual. And I'm not going to go through it all now, but I did a segment on Redacted Night. I'd say one of the segments I'm probably most proud of in my entire 8 years, 1,000 videos at Redacted Tonight, was going through every reason by genre, if you will, by crime, so-called, of why people are in prison. And this is ignoring all the innocent ones, but going through every area why people are in prison and showing why they actually don't need to be. Grab some water. They actually don't need to be in prison. And I broke it down. And by the end of it, when you've actually gone through every so-called crime and what the so-called punishment could be, instead of locking them up for years and years and years, you get down to we should have a few thousand people maybe in prison, like hardcore serial pedophiles and serial rapists and serial murderers, or maybe even just one murderer. I'll let you be in prison. But my point is just, I'm kidding there, obviously, but my point is just that we could get this down to a tiny, it'd be, I looked up I remember looking up the number of cities in America, and there's thousands of cities in America. And so I'm like, so if you take the number of prisoners that would be left and the number of cities in America, you would basically have 5 prisoners per city in America, even the small cities. And so they could have a house. Every city in America would have a prison house that has 5 people in it. And you could really get it down to that without having anybody fucking violent out there, any fucking awful people just bludgeoning everybody. There's not a lot of Hannibal Lecters in the world, honestly. So.
No. Oh, and I saw somebody mentioning in the chat that it's not just about when they're in prison, because after prison, they, people, if they're not forced back into prison with some bullshit 3 strikes or something like that, you're not allowed to vote. You can't get a job. You can't get an apartment. You can't get a loan. You can't. So even if and when these people come back to their communities, they can't be full parts of those communities, because they're literally, well, not literally, but they're figuratively still in the handcuffs from the system, because they're not allowed to be part of society again, even though we're told that prison is to rehabilitate people so they can come back into society. But I feel like that's not
right. I also love in a lot of places they can't vote after they've gotten out of prison. And I'm like, the whole point of the prison was served your debt to humanity, or whatever, your debt to society. So
didn't you have a joke about this too?
Well, yeah, and I don't remember.
Look at the people we allowed.
Well, yeah, I the kind of bit was that they're like, well, they made a bad decision, and that's what landed them in jail. And I'm like, do you have any idea what kind of people we let vote? The number of Americans that make bad decisions? All kinds of fucking dickheads, assholes, twats, and dipshits. Yeah, Henry Kissinger can vote. Debbie Wasserman Schultz can vote. Pieces of shit. Donald Trump can vote. Horrible human beings can vote. So the idea that because this guy got locked up for having a joint on him when a cop strolled by, he can't vote is fucking laughable. Anyway, enough said.
It was a good bit. I liked it.
Thank you. All right, let's squeeze in one more story, and then the rest of the live stream will be at rumble.com/Lee Camp. So I hope everybody will join us there. It's running. It's already going on right at Rumble, so you can go over there right now if you'd like. Also, I'm noticing that every comment that seems to be showing up is only from YouTube, meaning Facebook is either not showing this video to anyone or they're blocking the comment ability. But
thanks, Fedbook.
Thanks, Fedbook, for being so awesome. And if you are going to drop out instead of going to rumble.com/Lee Camp, I hope you will become a member at leecamp.net. Wait.
I'm being accosted.
It's over here.
I just wanted to block my face.
leecamp.net. You can join over there without actually paying. The minimum level is $5 for the full to see every post and all that shit and be part of the Q&A on Fridays. But you can join over there for free and just see what it's like. So please, everybody, if you want to support my shit at all, what we do, it is only funded by you. It's completely independent. There's no sponsors, ads. I'm never like, buy Coors Light. It's the most delicious of the shit tasting beers. So
there is, however, a Swedish Castle on that mug.
Is there? Oh, okay. There you go. So please become a member. Whether you have the $5 a month or not, please become a member at leecamp.net. All right, so let's do one more story here. And I know this is your favorite. This is the CIA, and the CIA is just they're so loving and caring, and they want us to respect the right kind of Americans. And so I think that how this ended up happening, and I know this is from a few weeks ago, but it's important. And I think how this ended up happening is they were like, everybody the CIA so-called honors from historically, like from before, 30, 40 years ago, is all white folks. So we here at the CIA need to honor someone who is not white. And here's what they came up with. Want to do the honors? Speaking of honors.
CIA honors Underground Railroad and Civil War hero Harriet Tubman as a model spy with a new statue. The move is part of an effort. This is the subheadline, which is almost better than the headline. The move is part of an effort by the CIA to bolster diversity at an agency where minorities have long been underrepresented.
What? Why were they
You
underrepresented?
mean because the CIA exists to like kill and oppress black and brown people, or
They have killed some black folks, so there was that.
But
Oh,
can
yeah,
you
I was
please
gonna-
play
I was
the
gonna
video,
play the
because
video.
The video is
That's
the most
right.
amazing.
Dude, it's fucking incredible. I love how it starts with silence.
Harriet Tubman's life reflects the values of our ethos. She has traits like self-sacrifice, selflessness, stewardship. These are all traits that we want our officers to embody. In the lead up to the Civil War on the Underground Railroad, she would go into the South, into a denied area, and exfiltrate out enslaved people to freedom here in the North. So what she did was an example of intelligence work, going behind enemy lines, using safe houses, signals intelligence to get people to freedom.
So the first thing that I want to point out is that the CIA can't even do this short of a video without lying. Because
Like,
if dude is at CIA headquarters at Langley, that shit is in Virginia, which is not the North.
right.
Dude said would exfiltrate them and bring them here to the North. You're in fucking Virginia, okay? So that's the first thing.
That's
that I take issue
that's
with.
A on a long list.
But of course, okay, I also want to know what the CIA museum director is like, because holy shit, I can only imagine what the CIA museum is
I
like.
want to know what he did to get busted down to CIA museum director. Like, did he must have like raped a dog. Like, there's like the level of shit awfulness you had to do to be the CIA museum director.
Okay, and also, like, is the CIA museum not? I mean, to me, that would just be like a long list, and then we could these people, and then these people in democratically elected a lovely socialist, but sadly, he cut his head off while shaving. So,
It's like, what is it? Yeah, what would they even have in there? Because everything that's true about the CIA, they don't want to talk about. So what do they fucking show in that museum? Oh, you know what they show is they show the things that Graham and I, we have a podcast called Government Secrets. For those of you who don't know, we talk a lot about CIA stupid shit. They probably show the stupid shit that was dumb, but that for idiots looks cool. Like they made a fake dragonfly, like an automatic dragonfly back in the 70s, which I don't know what a robotic dragonfly looked like in the 70s, but it's like
probably
shit.
not realistic at all.
It's like shit like that where they're like, we had a robot dragonfly.
So yeah, so obviously it's like fucking this is it's like using MLK as an example of being a proud American, and isn't this great, and racist lawmakers being like, let's celebrate MLK Day, or just the FBI tweeting about how great MLK was. And I mean, this is just so like, are we just not doing irony anymore? Like, are we just, is irony dead? Because this is,
they're an agency almost, but not quite, but almost like designed specifically to make sure non-whites don't take over America. Like that is one of their main fucking goals, is to make sure American empire continues and they destroy everyone in the non-white countries that are a risk to that. And I mean, how repulsed, dude. Harriet Tubman, they're doing everything they can to just like fucking try and co-opt her image, putting her on the dollar bill. How disgusted
I
would
know,
she
I
be
know.
to be on a dollar bill, to be the CIA's example of old school CIA agents? The fuck are you talking about?
Like how? And I'm just curious. Like how many people walking into that building think that that's like a statue of somebody they should be chasing, and not actually like. But I mean, because it's just so off. It's so off. It's just so wrong that
I think we've gotten past the point of words in this story.
yes, I have. Now I just want to punch a CIA operative. That's the only thing left I have to do.
Dude, it's so revolting. And I love and it's so clearly because they were like, well, we want to have historical figures we can say are what the CIA supports. And they were like, oh, well, that's basically like what we were in the 1800s was like the Klan. Like,
I know.
like
I
if they
know.
would have the actual kind of representative of CIA didn't exist back then, but it'd be the type of person that was doing the same shit as CIA. It'd be like all just awful racist white guys that were like infiltrating people trying to end slavery and shit. Okay, so we are going to rumble.com/LeeCamp, and the next story.
Put it in the...
Okay. And the next story may be the first time we've ever disagreed. No, I'm actually just kidding. We have had disagreements.
Also, I don't know that we'll disagree, but that remains to be seen.
It may be a partial disagreement. We're going to talk about the Van Gogh attack. All right.
Which is not, as it sounds, Van Gogh attacking someone. He is thoroughly innocent.
I thought he threw his ear at some guy.
Ouch! Too soon.
Too soon. Don't worry, he didn't hear it. You're gonna miss jokes like